My spear broke in half the moment I understood I was going to die. I am Kessa Vale, third blade of the Drenari clanhold, and I want that fact remembered exactly as it happened, without softening. 11 Skarn raiders stood around me in a tight, closing ring. Their armor plates clicked together as they moved, a sound like teeth grinding, and their long curved blades caught the weak afternoon light. 3 of my clan sisters lay behind me, unmoving. My left leg was useless, bent wrong at the knee from a blow I never saw coming. And now the spear my mother had given me, the one weapon I trusted more than my own hands, had snapped against a raider's shoulder plate like a dry branch. I looked at the broken half still in my grip. It was not enough to fight with. It was barely enough to lean on. The lead raider let out a long, clicking laugh, if you could call it that, and raised its blade arm. The others tightened the circle another step, the way predators do when they know the chase is over and only the ending remains. I planted the broken haft in the dirt, forced myself up on my good leg, and decided that whatever happened next, I would not turn my back to them. I would face it. That was the exact moment the sky tore open. I had heard many terrible sounds in my years of fighting. I had heard war drums, collapsing towers, the screech of engines dying mid-flight. Nothing prepared me for this. It began as a whisper far above the clouds, grew into a whistle, then into a scream that made the raiders themselves freeze and look up. Something was falling, fast, trailing smoke, and it was falling directly toward the center of our circle. It struck the ground hard enough that dust rose in a ring around the impact point, and small stones rained down like dark hail. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the raiders, creatures that feared very little, stood still with their blades half raised. Then a voice came from the settling dust, calm, almost bored, speaking in accented but clear trade tongue. Well, that's going to leave a mark. The dust cleared enough to show a shape standing in a shallow crater, rolling one shoulder and then the other like someone checking for a strain rather than checking for broken bones. He wore a scorched flight suit, the kind of gear I had only seen in old reports about the human forces stationed 2 systems away. His helmet visor was cracked and pushed up onto his forehead, revealing a face streaked with soot and, strangely, a faint, amused expression. He looked around at the 11 raiders, then he looked at me, spearless and barely standing. He smiled like we had bumped into each other at a market stall rather than in the center of a killing ring. Mind if I join the fight? I did not answer right away. I was too busy trying to understand what I was looking at. A person had just fallen out of the sky, landed hard enough to crater solid ground, and instead of lying still and catching his breath, he was asking permission to help me fight 11 armed raiders. The nearest Skarn recovered first. It let out a sharp clicking cry and swung its blade arm at the stranger's head with enough force to split stone. He did not dodge the way I expected. He leaned, just enough, letting the blade pass close enough to stir his hair, and drove something small and gray into the gap where the raider's neck plates met its shoulder. The raider folded and did not get up. 1, he said, as calmly as counting coins on a table. The others did not hesitate for long. 3 more converged on him at once, which any soldier would tell you is the correct response to a lone fighter, even an unusual one. I expected him to be overwhelmed. Instead, he used the crater's edge as cover, let 2 of the raiders collide with each other trying to go around it, and struck twice more before they even understood what had gone wrong. I have trained my whole life to read a fight, to see the shape of violence before it happens. What I saw from him was not desperation. It was arithmetic. Every movement solved a problem before the problem had time to grow. He was hurt. I could see that much. A cut above his eyebrow sent a thin line down the side of his face, and he favored his right leg the way I favored my own ruined one. But he kept talking through it, quiet remarks under his breath. Is that all you've got? Come on then. The kind of thing a person says when they refuse to admit how much danger they are actually in. 3 raiders became 2. 2 became 1, and that one made the mistake of turning toward me instead of him, thinking a wounded fighter with half a spear was the easier kill. My mother's broken spear found its eye slit before it finished its turn. Nice. he said, breathing hard, offering me an actual grin, as if we had not both nearly died several times in the last few minutes. Knew you had it in you. When the last raider fell, silence dropped over the clearing so suddenly it felt like its own kind of sound. 11 bodies lay scattered across ground that, minutes earlier, had been shaped entirely around my death. He sat down hard on the crater's rim, peeled back a torn section of his flight suit to check a gash along his side, and started treating himself with the calm efficiency of someone repairing simple equipment rather than his own body. "You fell from orbit," I said. It was not really a question. My voice did not sound steady, and I found that I did not care. "Pod malfunction," he said. "Whole transport went down about 6 lengths that way." He tilted his head vaguely toward the horizon. "Saw the fight through the crack in my visor on the way down. Figured landing in the middle of it was more useful than landing in the middle of nothing. You could have died." "Sure," he said, in the same tone someone might use to admit it could rain later. "You were about to, though. Seemed rude not to stop by." I did not know what to do with a person who treated falling out of the sky into a circle of armed raiders as a mild inconvenience worth interrupting for a stranger's sake. I would later learn this was not unusual for his people. I would later learn it was, in fact, the entire point of them. I helped bind the wound at his side using cloth torn from a fallen raider's cloak, the way my mother had taught me. He packed a strange, fast-hardening foam from a pouch on his belt against my ruined knee, and within moments the pain dulled to something distant and manageable. He offered me a flat gray bar of food that tasted like pressed dust and somehow also tasted like relief. "Kessa Vale," I told him. "Third blade of the Dranari clanhold. Ethan Hale," he said. "Corporal, if we're being formal about it. Good to meet you, Kessa. Sorry about your spear." "It was my mother's," I said. "Then we'll find you one that's even better," he said, and somehow it did not sound like comfort. It sounded like a promise. We had perhaps 30 breaths of quiet before the ground began to hum beneath us, faint at first, then unmistakable. Ethan went still, head tilted, listening the way a person listens when they already suspect the answer and do not want to be right. "That's not wind," he said. I pressed my palm flat against the dirt and felt it too, a low, steady rhythm that had nothing to do with weather. Marching, many feet, moving together, still distant, but closing. "A warband," I said. "A large one, larger than what we just faced." "How large?" he asked, already checking the charge readout on his small gray weapon. "Large enough that 11 were only the front edge of it," I said. "We cannot stay here." He looked at the wreck of his transport smoking somewhere past the ridge, then at my ruined leg, then at the darkening tree line where the humming grew steadily louder. Whatever calculation he was running behind his eyes finished quickly. "Then I guess we're walking," he said, offering me his shoulder to lean on. "Try to keep up, third blade." I would have laughed, if laughing had not felt so dangerously loud in that moment. Instead, I took his shoulder, gathered what remained of my broken spear, and we moved into the trees together, away from the sound of marching feet, toward whatever waited for us next. The forest beyond the clearing was thick with silver-leafed trees, whose bark gave off a faint glow in the dimming light, enough to see by, but not enough to be seen easily. Ethan moved slower than I expected for someone freshly fallen from orbit, favoring his side, but he never once complained about the pace I set, even leaning on him as I was. "We are not going to outrun a full warband on foot," I told him after the first stretch of silence. "Not with my leg like this." "Then we don't outrun them," he said. "We outthink them." I asked what he meant, and he explained, in that same unbothered tone, that raiding bands like the Skarn moved fast but poorly coordinated once their formation broke. If we could not outpace the whole group, we could split their attention, make them chase shadows instead of us, buy enough time to reach anywhere with walls and allies. It was a reasonable plan. It also required us to survive long enough to attempt it. We found a shallow ravine an hour later, cut through with a thin stream, and Ethan insisted we stop just long enough to properly check both our injuries. He used another packet of the hardening foam on my knee, this time wrapping a stiff support around the joint that let me walk without his shoulder, though slowly, and with a limp I doubted would fade soon. In turn, I checked the wound at his side and found it deeper than he had let on, though he waved off my concern the same way he waved off nearly everything, with a small joke about it building character. "You are not taking this seriously enough," I told him. "I'm taking it exactly as seriously as it deserves," he said, "which is seriously enough to fix it, and not so seriously that I forget to keep moving." I did not have a response to that, so I said nothing, and we kept moving. The humming we had felt through the ground earlier had faded, but I did not trust the silence. Skarn warbands were not known for stealth, which meant either they had lost our trail entirely, or they had sent scouts ahead quietly while the main body advanced at their usual pace. I told Ethan this, and he nodded like he had already reached the same conclusion. "Then we watch our backs, and our sides both," he said, "not just the front." We climbed out of the ravine as the light continued to fade, moving through a stretch of open ground that I did not like the feel of, too flat, too exposed, with only scattered boulders for cover. Ethan seemed to feel the same unease because he slowed his pace and kept glancing toward the tree line on our left, though nothing moved there that I could see. Then something screamed from that same tree line, high and shrill, nothing like the clicking cry of a Skarn raider. Ethan's weapon was up, and aimed before I had even fully turned my head. "Not raiders," he said quietly. "Something else." I knew what he meant before the creature broke from the tree line. A ridgeback, one of the large predators native to this region, drawn out by the noise and blood of the earlier fight, and now hunting anything wounded or slow. It was long-bodied, low to the ground, with a jagged crest along its spine and jaws built for cracking bone. Ordinarily, a Drenari patrol would avoid one entirely, since fighting a ridgeback cost more than it was worth even when victorious. "We do not fight that," I said. "We run. Running on this leg," he pointed out. "Running anyway," I said, and we did, cutting hard to the right, toward a cluster of rock formations that might slow the creature down if we could reach them in time. The ridgeback closed the distance faster than either of us expected, and Ethan, without slowing his own stride, fired twice into the ground just ahead of its path, not to strike it, but to startle it off course. It worked for exactly as long as we needed, veering the creature just enough that we reached the rocks a few strides ahead of its jaws. We wedged ourselves into a narrow gap between two boulders, too tight for the ridgeback's broad shoulders to follow, and listened to it snarl and scrape at the stone outside for several long minutes before finally losing interest and slinking back toward the trees. "That is twice today something has tried to end us," I said, once my breathing steadied. "Third time, if you count my landing," Ethan said, "which honestly I think we should." Despite everything, I felt something close to a laugh rise in my chest, and did not fully suppress it. He looked pleased with himself for causing it, which only made it harder to stop. We stayed in that gap between the rocks until true darkness fell, resting in shifts, though I noticed Ethan slept far less than his share, keeping watch even during what should have been his turn to rest. When I pointed this out, he shrugged and said humans did not need as much sleep as people assumed, which I did not entirely believe, but did not argue either, since exhaustion clearly weighed on him more than he wanted to show. Near midnight, a new sound reached us, distant but distinct from anything before it, a low mechanical drone moving somewhere far overhead. Ethan went very still, tilting his head to track it. "That's one of ours," he said quietly. "Search pattern. They're looking for survivors from the transport." "Can you signal it?" I asked. "Not without giving away our position to anything else listening too," he said. "But it means my people know something went down out here. That's something." We did not signal the drone, though I could see how much it cost him to let it pass overhead and continue on without answer. Instead, we pressed on once the drone's drone faded, moving now under full darkness, guided mostly by the faint glow of the silver-barked trees and Ethan's small handheld device that displayed shapes and directions I did not understand but trusted regardless, since he clearly did. By the time gray light began creeping into the sky again, we had crossed into terrain I recognized. Low rolling hills marking the outer edge of Dranari held ground, and in the distance, faint against the horizon, I saw smoke rising in slow dark columns from a shape I knew immediately. An outpost, I said. One of ours, and it is burning. Ethan followed my gaze, and his expression shifted from tired determination into something sharper, more focused. Then that's where we're headed, he said. Because if there's people in there fighting for their lives, I'd rather be part of that math too. I looked at him, exhausted, wounded, still willing to walk toward a burning outpost simply because someone inside it might need help, and understood then that whatever had fallen out of the sky the day before was not a fluke, not a single strange encounter, but a pattern I was only beginning to learn. We adjusted our course toward the smoke and kept walking, side by side, into whatever waited for us there. The outpost, when we finally reached its outer wall, was worse off than the smoke alone suggested. Half the perimeter fence had been torn down, scorched black in places, and the main gate hung twisted on one hinge. Skarn raiders moved in loose clusters around the compound, not the disciplined warband we had fled the day before, but enough of them that any direct approach would have been foolish. Ethan pulled me down behind a low ridge overlooking the compound and studied the scene with narrowed eyes. They're testing the walls, not storming them, he said, which means whoever's inside is still holding. How can you tell? I asked. Because if the defenders were already broken, this would be a lot louder and a lot faster, he said. This is a siege, not a slaughter. Not yet, anyway. I counted roughly 40 raiders spread around the compound, far too many for the two of us to face directly, wounded as we both were. Yet the alternative, walking away while my people held that wall alone, was not something I could accept, and I said as much. Ethan nodded slowly, already scanning the terrain for something useful. Didn't say we walk away, he said. Said we don't storm 40 raiders head on. There's a difference. He pointed toward a drainage gully running along the northern edge of the compound, half hidden by scrub growth, leading almost directly to a smaller side door in the outpost wall that the raiders had not bothered to watch closely, likely assuming it led nowhere useful. If that door's still clear on the inside, he said, we get in quiet, add 2 more bodies to whoever's holding that wall, and figure out the rest from there. It was a thin plan built on assumptions, but it was better than none, and we moved before either of us could second-guess it further. The gully was tight and uncomfortable, forcing us to crawl for long stretches with my bad leg protesting every movement, but it kept us hidden from the raiders patrolling above, and after what felt like far too long, we reached the small side door Ethan had spotted. It was unlocked, either through oversight or hope, and we slipped through into a narrow storage corridor that smelled of scorched metal and old grain stores. Voices reached us almost immediately, tense and clipped, coming from further down the corridor. Ethan raised his weapon instinctively, then lowered it slightly when the words resolved into a trade tongue dialect I recognized, not raider speech at all. Dranari, I whispered, ours. We rounded the corner to find 3 defenders bracing a splintered barricade against the corridor's far end, exhausted expressions turning to startled alertness as we appeared. One of them, an older warrior with a long scar across her jaw, raised her blade instinctively before recognizing my clan markings and lowering it just as quickly. "Casavale," she said, disbelief coloring her voice. "We thought your scouting party lost." "Lost, then found again," I said, gesturing to Ethan. "This is Ethan Hale. He fell out of the sky in the middle of a raider circle and decided to help rather than watch." The scarred warrior studied him for a long moment, taking in the scorched flight suit and the small gray weapon still held ready in his grip. "A human," she said, something between surprise and cautious relief in her tone. "We had heard rumors that your kind sometimes fought alongside Dranari border patrols. I did not expect to see it proven on our own wall." "Happy to prove things when it matters," Ethan said. "What's your situation in here?" The situation, as the defenders explained quickly while leading us deeper into the compound, was grim but not yet hopeless. The outpost held perhaps 30 remaining fighters, spread thin along a perimeter designed for twice that number, with supplies running low and no word yet reaching the clanhold capital about the scale of the attack. Worse, one of the defenders had overheard raider chatter suggesting this assault was not an isolated raid at all, but the leading edge of something far larger, a full invasion force gathering beyond the eastern ridge. "If that's true," Ethan said once the briefing finished, "this outpost isn't the target. It's a speed bump. Something's coming behind it, and this fight is just meant to slow down anyone trying to warn people further in." The scarred warrior, who introduced herself as Mira Voss, nodded grimly. "That matches what we suspect," she said, "which is why we have tried 3 times to send a rider east with warning, and lost all 3 attempts to raider patrols circling the outer roads." I glanced at Ethan, and saw the same thought already forming behind his eyes that had formed behind mine. "Then we need a 4th attempt," I said, "one that does not fail." Before anyone could respond, the compound shook with a heavy impact against the main gate, followed by raised shouts along the wall and the unmistakable sound of renewed assault. Mira Voss was moving before the echo faded, barking orders toward the nearest defenders, and Ethan and I followed without hesitation, my ruined knee forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The wall fighting that followed was unlike the encirclement Ethan and I had survived together the day before. This was not a single desperate stand against overwhelming numbers, but a coordinated defense, dozens of fighters moving in practiced rhythm along the ramparts, using narrow firing points and prepared barricades to funnel raiders into killing lanes rather than facing them in open ground. Ethan adapted to the rhythm almost instantly, positioning himself at a gap in the barricade where his weapon's range gave the defenders an advantage they had clearly been missing, picking off raiders attempting to scale ropes against the outer wall before they could gain solid footing. I fought beside Mira Voss near the gate itself, using a borrowed blade in place of my broken spear, holding the line each time the twisted gate buckled further under raider pressure. The assault lasted the better part of an hour, raiders retreating and regrouping twice before finally withdrawing entirely as the sun climbed higher, apparently unwilling to press further losses against a wall that had held firmer than their scouts must have reported. When the retreat finally came, a ragged cheer rose along the ramparts, though it faded quickly into exhausted silence as defenders began tending wounds and counting losses. Fewer had fallen than in previous assaults, Mira Voss told us, largely thanks to the additional firing position Ethan had claimed along the northern wall. That evening, as the compound settled into uneasy rest, Mira Voss gathered what remained of the outpost's senior fighters, along with myself and Ethan, to discuss what came next. The consensus was grim but clear. If a larger invasion force truly waited beyond the eastern ridge, the clanhold capital needed warning immediately, and every previous attempt to send that warning by the main roads had failed. "There is another route," Mira Voss said finally, reluctance clear in her voice. "An old relay station built into the ridge itself, meant for exactly this kind of emergency signal. It has not been used in years, and reaching it means crossing ground the raiders currently hold between here and there." "How far?" Ethan asked. "Half a day's travel, if unopposed," Mira Voss said. "Considerably longer if opposed, which it will be." I looked at Ethan, already certain of what he would say before he said it, and found I was already certain of my own answer as well. "Then we leave at first light," I said, "before they regroup for another assault." Mira Voss studied us both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will send 2 of my own with you," she said. "You should not attempt this with only 2. Ethan glanced at me, something unreadable passing behind his tired eyes, then back to Mira Voss. "4's better than 2, he agreed. "But whatever happens out there, we're not turning back until that signal goes out. Too many people depending on it. None of us slept well that night, though we each pretended otherwise for the sake of the others. I lay awake listening to the distant sounds of the retreated raider camp beyond the ridge, wondering how large the true invasion force truly was, and whether 4 fighters and an old relay station would be enough to warn my people in time. At first light, we gathered at the same small side door through which Ethan and I had entered the day before, joined now by 2 additional Drenari fighters Mira Voss had selected, a quiet, steady warrior named Torin Ash and a younger scout named Lyra Kest, both grim-faced but resolute. 5 of us, Ethan said, checking his weapon's charge one final time. Better odds than 11 to 1, at least. Slightly better, I agreed. We slipped out through the gully as dawn broke fully over the compound, moving east toward the ridge and whatever waited for us along the way, carrying between us the last real chance my people had of learning what truly approached from beyond the horizon. The ground beyond the outpost climbed steadily upward into rockier terrain, broken by deep gullies and scattered stands of thorned brush that scraped at exposed skin as we passed. Torin Ash took point, moving with the careful precision of someone who had crossed contested ground many times before, while Lyra Kest covered our rear, young but sharp-eyed, catching movement in the distance that the rest of us missed entirely. "We are being watched," she said quietly, less than an hour into the crossing. "Scouts, moving parallel to us on the northern ridgeline." "How many?" Ethan asked. "2 that I can see," she said. "There will be more I cannot." Ethan studied the terrain ahead, weighing options with the same quiet focus I had come to recognize from our first encounter together. "Then we assume they'll try to slow us down rather than stop us outright," he said. "Buy time for the main force to reposition. Which means we keep moving and we don't let ourselves get pinned anywhere narrow." Torin Ash nodded agreement, adjusting our path slightly to avoid a narrow defile that would have made an ideal ambush point, choosing instead a longer route across more open, though more exposed, ground. The scouts shadowed us for the better part of 2 hours without directly engaging, exactly as Ethan predicted, though the tension of knowing eyes tracked our every movement wore at all of us differently. Lyra Kest grew increasingly watchful, while Torin Ash grew quieter, conserving energy for whatever confrontation eventually came. Ethan, strangely, seemed to relax slightly the longer nothing happened, though I understood by now this was simply how he processed sustained danger, treating each uneventful stretch as a small victory rather than a delayed threat. The confrontation came, when it finally arrived, not from the scouts shadowing us, but from a fresh group of raiders positioned ahead of our path entirely, clearly alerted by the scouts and given time to prepare an ambush along a narrow rocky corridor we had no way to avoid without losing hours of daylight we could not afford to lose. Torin Ash spotted the ambush first, freezing mid-stride and raising a closed fist, our signal to halt. Through the gaps in the rocks ahead, I could make out perhaps a dozen raiders positioned along both sides of the corridor, weapons ready, waiting for us to walk directly into their kill zone. "We cannot go around," Torin Ash said quietly, "not without adding hours we do not have." "Then we don't go around," Ethan said. "We go through, but on our terms, not theirs." He outlined a plan quickly, using the terrain itself against the ambush rather than attempting to avoid it entirely. Lyra Kest, given her lighter frame and quick movement, would circle wide and create a distraction from the corridor's far end, drawing raider attention away from the entrance just long enough for the rest of us to breach the near end before the ambush could properly close around us. It was a dangerous plan, relying heavily on precise timing, but Lyra Kest accepted the role without hesitation, slipping away into the rocks, while the rest of us positioned ourselves at the corridor's entrance, waiting for her signal. It came several tense minutes later. A sharp whistle followed immediately by shouts of alarm from the corridor's far end as raiders scrambled to address the sudden disturbance. Ethan moved the instant the shouts began, and Torin Ash and I followed close behind, pushing hard into the corridor while raider attention remained split. The fighting that followed was fast and brutal in its efficiency. Raiders caught between 2 directions of threat, unable to properly organize a defense against either. Ethan moved with the same precise, economical violence I remembered from our first encounter, each action solving a problem before it could fully develop, while Torin Ash fought beside me with disciplined, practiced strikes that spoke of long years defending Drenari borders. We cleared the corridor in minutes, rather than the sustained fight the raiders had clearly planned for, though not without cost. Torin Ash took a glancing wound along his forearm that he waved off as minor, while I aggravated my already injured knee, catching myself during a hard dodge, sending fresh pain lancing up my leg that I forced myself to ignore for the moment. Lyra Kest rejoined us at the corridor's far end, breathless but unharmed, having successfully drawn enough attention away to make the plan work. "That won't be the last of them," she said, glancing back the way we came. "There will be more between here and the relay station. Then we keep moving faster than they can regroup," Ethan said, already checking the terrain ahead for our continued path. We pushed onward through the afternoon, encountering 2 smaller patrols along the way, each dealt with quickly through a combination of Ethan's tactical instincts and the accumulated experience of Torin Ash and Lyra Kest, both of whom had clearly spent years learning to survive exactly this kind of hostile crossing. By the time the ridgeline finally came into clear view ahead of us, the sun had begun its slow descent toward evening, casting long shadows across the broken terrain. The relay station itself sat built into the ridge's face, an old stone structure with a single narrow access path leading up to it, easily defended but equally easy to become trapped within if surrounded. "That's the tricky part," Ethan observed, studying the structure. "Only one way in or out. If they catch us up there, we're stuck." "Then we do not let them catch us," I said. We approached the access path carefully, finding it thankfully unguarded, likely because the raiders had not expected any Drenari fighters to attempt reaching such an obscure, long unused structure. Inside, the relay station proved dusty, but largely intact, ancient signal equipment still standing, though clearly untouched for years, exactly as Mira Voss had described. Torin Ash moved immediately to the equipment, studying old markings and controls with the focus of someone who had trained for this exact possibility, while Lyra Kest took position at the entrance, watching the path below for any sign of pursuit. "It will take time to properly calibrate the signal," Torin Ash said, working carefully through the ancient controls. "Perhaps an hour, if nothing interrupts the process." An hour felt like an impossibly long stretch of time, given how close we had come to disaster throughout the day. But there was no alternative except patience, and so we settled into an uneasy watch while Torin Ash worked. The interruption came roughly 30 minutes into the calibration process, when Lyra Kest hissed a sharp warning from the entrance. Movement along the access path below. A raider patrol far larger than anything we had faced yet that day, clearly alerted somehow to our location and moving with purpose directly toward the relay station. "How many?" Ethan asked, already moving to join Lyra Kest at the entrance. "Too many," she said grimly. "We cannot hold this entrance against that number for long." "Torin Ash cannot stop the calibration," I said. "Not now, this close to finishing." "Then we buy him the time," Ethan said, already positioning himself at the narrow entrance where the path's width would only allow a few raiders to approach at once. "This is actually a decent spot for a stand, if you think about it. Only one way up means only a few of them can reach us at a time." It was, I realized, an echo of the very first fight we had shared together, though the circumstances now were nearly reversed. Rather than facing overwhelming numbers in open ground, we now held a narrow defensible position against a force that could only approach a few at a time, buying precious minutes for something far more important than either of our lives individually. The raiders reached the base of the access path minutes later, and the fighting that followed tested every reserve of strength and focus remaining in each of us. Lyra Kest fought with fierce, quick strikes, using the narrow terrain to her advantage against raiders unable to bring their full numbers to bear at once. I held the position beside her despite my throbbing knee, refusing to yield ground that Torin Ash needed protected. Ethan anchored the defense at the most critical point, his weapon's precision proving invaluable against raiders attempting to rush the narrow path in quick succession. Behind us, Torin Ash called out with rising urgency that the calibration neared completion, though every passing minute felt like it might be our last, as raider numbers below seemed to swell rather than diminish, reinforcements clearly summoned by whatever alert had first revealed our position. "Almost there," Torin Ash called out, voice tight with concentration. "Just hold a little longer." Ethan took a glancing hit along his shoulder that sent him staggering briefly before he recovered, gritting his teeth and pushing back into position without complaint, though I saw the pain clearly written across his expression despite his attempts to hide it. "You are hurt," I said, unable to fully mask the concern in my voice. "Kind of comes with the job," he said, managing a strained smile despite everything. "Ask me again once we're not currently being invaded." "The signal is ready," Torin Ash finally called out, relief evident even through the chaos of battle. "Sending now." A low tone emanated from the ancient equipment behind us, followed by a faint pulsing light along the relay station's outer structure, confirmation that the warning had finally, successfully, begun transmitting toward the Clanhold capital, and, we could only hope, toward whatever human forces might also be listening for exactly this kind of signal. "Signals away," Ethan confirmed, though the raiders below showed no sign of retreating now that their attempt to stop us had failed. If anything, we now needed simply to survive long enough for that warning to matter. We held the narrow entrance through what felt like the longest remaining stretch of that day, each of us drawing on reserves we did not know we still possessed, until finally, as darkness began settling fully over the ridge, a new sound reached us from above, distinct from anything raider forces could produce, a deep mechanical drone accompanied by bright descending lights cutting through the evening sky. Ethan's expression shifted instantly from grim determination to something closer to disbelief. "That's a response," he said. "That's actually a response." The raiders below, apparently recognizing the same threat in those descending lights that Ethan clearly did, began a hurried retreat down the access path, abandoning their assault entirely as the mechanical drone grew louder overhead. We had done it. The signal had reached someone, and someone had answered. The lights descending from the evening sky resolved, as they drew closer, into two sleek human transport craft, their engines throwing long shadows across the ridge as they settled onto a flat stretch of ground just below the relay station. Ethan let out a breath I suspect he had been holding for longer than he realized, lowering his weapon slightly as familiar shapes emerged from the transports below. "Friendlies," he confirmed, relief evident in his voice for the first time since I had known him. "Actual friendlies." Torin Ash emerged from the relay station, exhausted but steady, while Lyra Kest kept watch a moment longer to ensure the retreating raiders truly withdrew rather than simply repositioning. Together, we made our way down the access path to meet the arriving humans, a mixed group of soldiers moving with practiced efficiency despite the tension clearly written across their expressions. A woman near the front of the group, her uniform marked with insignia I did not recognize but assumed indicated rank, stepped forward as we approached, her eyes settling on Ethan with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Corporal Hale," she said. "We logged your transport as lost with no survivors expected. Command is going to want a very detailed explanation for how you're standing here right now." "Long story, Commander," Ethan said. "Short version, I landed in the middle of a fight that wasn't mine, decided to help anyway, and things kept happening from there." The commander, who introduced herself as Grace Bennett, studied the rest of our group with evident curiosity, particularly myself and my fellow Drenari fighters. "And these three are the reason you're alive to tell that story, I take it," she said. "Among other things, yes," Ethan said. "This is Kessa Vale, Torin Ash, and Lyra Kest. Without them, I'd have been raider bait somewhere in the hills, assuming I survived the fall at all." Commander Bennett nodded slowly, something thoughtful passing behind her expression as she took in the full weight of the situation. "The signal you sent from this relay station reached our forward base roughly 40 minutes ago," she said. "It corroborated intelligence we'd already begun gathering independently, though your confirmation gave us the exact location and scale we needed. We believe you're right about the invasion force massing beyond the eastern ridge. Our scouts have confirmed troop movements consistent with a major offensive, not a simple raiding campaign." "How large?" I asked, dreading the answer even as I asked it. "Larger than anything documented in this sector before," Commander Bennett said grimly. "Which is exactly why your warning mattered as much as it did. It bought us time to properly respond rather than being caught as unprepared as your outpost nearly was." The conversation that followed, held partly at the relay station and partly aboard one of the transport craft as we made our way back toward the besieged outpost, painted an increasingly grim picture. The Skarn invasion force, according to combined Drenari and human intelligence, numbered in the thousands, organized under a warlord whose name translated roughly to something like the Hollow Crown, known for campaigns that left conquered territories stripped of nearly everything of value before moving on to the next target. "The outpost you left this morning," Commander Bennett explained, "currently sits directly in the path of that invasion force's likely advance route toward the Drenari clanhold capital. If we cannot reinforce and hold that position, or find an alternative way to delay the invasion's advance, the capital itself will face this same force within days rather than weeks." Ethan, listening carefully throughout the briefing, despite clear exhaustion weighing on him, finally spoke up as the transport craft crested the ridge and the outpost came back into view below, still standing, though clearly battered from the day's earlier assault. "Then that outpost becomes the line we hold," he said. "Reinforce it properly, and it stops being a speed bump and starts being an actual wall." Commander Bennett studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's exactly the recommendation I intend to make to command," she said, "which is why I'd like you and your new companions to be part of the briefing when we land. First-hand accounts carry weight that reports alone do not." The transport craft touched down within the outpost's damaged perimeter minutes later, drawing immediate attention from exhausted defenders who had spent the day expecting further assault rather than reinforcement. Mira Voss emerged from the command structure to greet us, disbelief giving way quickly to fierce relief as she took in the human transports and the small group returning successfully from what she had clearly feared might be a one-way mission. "The signal reached them," I confirmed, before she could ask. "And they came." What followed over the next several hours was a rapid transformation of the outpost from a barely holding defensive position into something resembling an actual stronghold. Human engineers, arriving aboard additional transports summoned by Commander Bennett, began reinforcing the damaged perimeter with equipment far beyond anything the original Drenari construction had employed, while additional soldiers bolstered the thin defensive lines that had nearly broken under the day's earlier assault. Ethan, despite clear exhaustion and the wound along his shoulder finally receiving proper treatment from a human medic who introduced herself as Lucy Marsh, remained heavily involved in the planning discussions that followed, his first-hand knowledge of the terrain and the enemy's tactics proving valuable to officers who had only intelligence reports to work from otherwise. "You really did just fall into the middle of all this, didn't you?" Lucy Marsh commented, working carefully on his shoulder wound while he continued reviewing terrain maps spread across a nearby table. "Pretty much, yeah," Ethan admitted. "Wasn't exactly planning on becoming part of a whole military campaign when my transport went down. Just figured someone needed help and I was in a position to give it. And now," she said, gesturing vaguely at the organized chaos of the reinforcement effort surrounding us, "look what that's turned into." I found myself studying him during that exchange, understanding something new about the strange, casual courage he carried so lightly. It had not been a single act, falling from the sky to help a stranger. It had been the beginning of a pattern that continued to ripple outward, each choice building naturally on the last, until a simple act of decency had become the foundation for an entire defensive campaign that might determine the fate of my people's capital. As evening deepened into full night, Commander Bennett gathered the senior officers, along with Mira Voss, myself, and Ethan, for a final strategic briefing before the next day's efforts would begin in earnest. The plan that emerged combined human reinforcement and equipment with Drenari knowledge of the terrain and defensive positioning honed over generations of border conflicts, an approach that neither side could have executed nearly as effectively alone. "We hold this position," Commander Bennett said, studying the assembled group with quiet determination. "We reinforce it properly, we coordinate our strengths, and we make the Hollow Crown's forces pay dearly for every step they attempt to take past this point. If we can delay their advance long enough, additional reinforcements from further human positions can arrive to properly turn this from a defensive stand into something more decisive." "And if the reinforcements do not arrive in time?" Mira Voss asked, voicing the question everyone present clearly wondered but had avoided stating directly. "Then we hold anyway," Ethan said quietly, before Commander Bennett could answer. "Because the alternative is letting that invasion force reach the capital unopposed, and that's not something any of us are willing to accept, reinforcements or not." Nobody argued the point. Instead, the briefing continued late into the night, refining defensive positions, allocating equipment, and preparing as thoroughly as possible for whatever the following days would bring. When it finally concluded, exhaustion had settled over everyone present, myself included, though sleep remained difficult to find given everything that loomed ahead. I found Ethan afterward, sitting alone near the outpost's damaged main gate, staring out toward the eastern ridge where, somewhere beyond sight, an invasion force numbering in the thousands continued preparing its own advance. "You should be resting," I told him, settling beside him despite my own exhaustion. "Could say the same to you," he replied, offering a tired smile. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the events of the past 2 days settling heavily between us, before I finally spoke the question that had lingered in my mind since the moment he first fell from the sky. "Why did you stop?" I asked. "When you saw the fight happening below you as you fell, you could have avoided it entirely, landed elsewhere, and no one would have known the difference." Ethan considered the question for a long moment before answering, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive, as I had half expected. "Honestly," he said, "I don't think I really decided anything at all. Saw someone about to lose everything, had a way to maybe stop that from happening, and the rest just followed from there. Didn't feel like a choice so much as it felt like the only thing that made sense." "And now?" I asked, "now that it has led to all of this, do you regret it?" He looked out toward the ridge again, toward the invasion force we both knew waited beyond it, toward the days of difficult fighting that surely lay ahead regardless of how thoroughly we prepared. "Not for a second," he said finally, "because whatever happens next, it happens with people worth fighting alongside. That's not nothing, that's actually everything." I did not have a response equal to that, so I simply sat beside him a while longer, watching the stars emerge fully overhead, allowing myself, for just a moment, to believe that whatever waited beyond the ridge, we would face it together, and that together might prove to be enough. The following days passed in a blur of preparation, each hour bringing fresh reinforcements, additional fortifications, and mounting tension as scouts reported the Hollow Crown's invasion force drawing steadily closer along the eastern approach. Commander Bennett coordinated tirelessly between human and Drenari forces, while Mira Voss oversaw the integration of reinforced defenses along the outpost's rebuilt perimeter, and Ethan, still recovering from his injuries but refusing any suggestion of stepping back from the effort, worked alongside both, his unique perspective bridging gaps between two very different fighting traditions. I spent those days largely at his side, my knee slowly healing enough to bear weight without the stiff support Ethan had first fashioned for it, learning as much as I could about human tactics and equipment, while sharing what knowledge I possessed about Skarn fighting patterns and the treacherous terrain surrounding our position. On the fourth morning after the relay station's signal had gone out, scouts returned with news that ended any remaining uncertainty about what approached. The Hollow Crown's forces had crested the eastern ridge, visible now as a dark mass stretching across the horizon, numbering, by careful estimate, somewhere close to 3,000 fighters, supported by heavy siege equipment clearly intended to break through fortifications far stronger than our own. "They'll reach us by tomorrow, likely," Commander Bennett said, studying the reports with grim focus. "Maybe the day after, if their advance slows to bring up the siege equipment properly." "Do we have what we need to hold?" Mira Voss asked. "We have what we need to hold, longer than they expect," Commander Bennett said carefully. "Whether that proves long enough depends on factors none of us fully control yet." That evening, as final preparations continued around the clock, word arrived that additional human reinforcements, summoned days earlier following the relay station's warning, had finally begun their approach from a forward base several hours distant, though whether they would arrive before the Hollow Crown's forces reached our position remained uncertain. Ethan and I stood together along the reinforced perimeter that night, watching distant fires flicker along the horizon where the invasion force had made camp, close enough now that the glow of their fires was clearly visible even from our position. "Tomorrow, then," I said quietly. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "Or the day after, if we're lucky. Either way, this is the fight that decides things." I studied his profile in the dim light, noting how much steadier he seemed now compared to the exhausted, wounded stranger who had first fallen from the sky days earlier, though the weight of what approached clearly pressed on him as heavily as it pressed on the rest of us. "Whatever happens tomorrow," I said, "I want you to know that I do not regret the moment you fell into that circle either. Whatever this becomes, however it ends, I am glad it began the way it did." He turned to look at me fully then, something warm passing behind his tired eyes, despite everything looming ahead of us. "Yeah," he said quietly, "me too." The Hollow Crown's forces began their advance the following morning, exactly as scouts had predicted, a dark tide moving steadily across the terrain toward our reinforced position, siege equipment rumbling slowly behind the main advance. Every defender along the perimeter, human and Drenari alike, took position as the enemy drew closer, and I found myself standing beside Ethan once more, near the same section of wall where our very first shared fight beside the outpost had taken place days earlier, though the scale of what approached now dwarfed that earlier encounter entirely. "Whatever happens," Ethan said quietly, as the enemy advance drew within sight of our defenses, "I'm glad it's you standing beside me for this." "Same," I said simply, gripping the new spear Mira Voss had given me days earlier, forged properly by outpost craftsmen to replace the one I had lost, and finding it, somehow, felt exactly as strong as the one my mother had once given me. The first wave of the Hollow Crown's assault struck our defenses with tremendous force, siege equipment battering against reinforced walls that held, barely, under the initial impact. Defenders along the perimeter answered with everything at their disposal, human weaponry and Drenari discipline combining into a defense far more effective than either force could have mounted alone. Ethan fought beside me through that opening assault, with the same focused, economical precision I remembered from our very first encounter, though now surrounded by dozens of allies rather than facing overwhelming odds entirely alone. Commander Bennett coordinated the defense from a central position, directing reinforcements to weakening sections of the perimeter as the assault continued, while Mira Voss held the main gate alongside her most experienced fighters, refusing to yield ground even as pressure mounted steadily against that critical position. The battle raged through the morning and into the afternoon, wave after wave of Hollow Crown fighters testing our defenses, each assault slightly different in approach, forcing constant adaptation from defenders already exhausted from days of preparation. I lost count of how many raiders fell before my new spear, how many times Ethan's weapon found its mark against fighters attempting to breach the section of wall we held together, how many close calls each of us survived through nothing more than instinct honed over days of shared danger. By late afternoon, as the assault showed no sign of relenting despite mounting losses on the enemy side, word reached Commander Bennett that changed the entire tenor of the battle. The reinforcements summoned days earlier had finally arrived, not merely additional soldiers, but a substantial force, including heavier equipment, capable of striking directly at the Hollow Crown's rear formations, catching the invasion force in a position it had clearly not anticipated. The battle's momentum shifted almost immediately as reinforcements struck from an unexpected direction, forcing Hollow Crown commanders to divide their attention between the ongoing assault against our walls and this sudden new threat against their own flank. Defenders along the perimeter, sensing the shift, found fresh reserves of strength, pressing back against an assault that had, until moments earlier, seemed capable of continuing indefinitely. Ethan, noticing the change as quickly as anyone, turned to me with something like fierce hope, replacing the grim determination that had carried him through the day's fighting. "That's it," he said. "That's the turn. Hold just a little longer." We held, through the final difficult push of the afternoon, as reinforcements continued pressing against the Hollow Crown's rear formations, forcing a retreat that began as a controlled withdrawal and steadily collapsed into something closer to full disarray as the invasion force realized the battle had turned decisively against their favor. By evening, as the last remnants of the Hollow Crown's forces withdrew entirely from the field, abandoning much of their siege equipment in the process, an exhausted, disbelieving silence settled over the outpost's defenders, slowly giving way to something closer to genuine celebration as the full weight of what had been accomplished settled properly into everyone's understanding. We had held, against odds that had seemed, only days earlier, nearly impossible. We had held, and in holding, had broken the momentum of an invasion force that might otherwise have reached the Drenari clanhold capital entirely unopposed. Commander Bennett found Ethan and me later that evening, standing together near the same section of wall where we had fought throughout the day, both of us bearing fresh wounds alongside the older ones from days earlier, though neither of us particularly minded, given everything we had survived to reach this moment. "Command is going to want a very detailed report on everything that happened here," she said, though warmth colored her tone rather than the formal weight her words might otherwise have carried. Starting, I imagine, with exactly how a corporal with a malfunctioning transport pod ended up becoming central to breaking an entire invasion force. Ethan managed a tired laugh at that, glancing toward me with something warm and genuine in his expression. "Guess it all started with a pretty simple question," he said. "Mind if I join the fight?" Mira Voss joined us shortly after, exhaustion evident but pride clear in her bearing as she surveyed the outpost's battered but ultimately triumphant defenses. "The clanhold capital owes this outpost a debt it will not soon forget," she said. "And it owes an even greater debt to the two of you specifically, for everything that began the moment you both found each other in that circle days ago." I looked out toward the eastern ridge, quiet now in the settling evening light, where days earlier an overwhelming invasion force had first appeared, and thought back to the moment my spear had shattered, to the instant I had believed my story was ending in that circle of raiders, only for a stranger to fall from the sky and change everything that followed. "Whatever comes next," I said, finally breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us, "I believe we are ready to face it." Ethan looked at me, that same easy, genuine smile crossing his tired features, and nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I believe that too." Above us, the stars began emerging fully across the darkening sky, steady and constant, watching over an outpost that had, against every expectation, held its ground, and over two unlikely companions whose story together had only just begun.
I haven't got anything yet. I've been fishing my little ass off. Mano's fishing clothes. I think one of my characters has fishing clothes above it. Wait. I would have to eat substantially less. Ain't nobody got time for that. Above it, plump colantho. Oh, I've been fishing heaps. Oh, is that like you have to go and fish out in the ocean? Because I can't do that. Well, I have been fishing out in the ocean, but on little boats, NPC boats. I want one of these. I want the outfits. I'm obsessed with outfits. But I think like the premium thankful boxes, the outfits are all the same, so... But I want an outfit for every single character. I have 3 outfits so far. They could be bought on the marketplace. I don't think people ever list them though, and I don't have that kind of money yet. Yet. There's this Golden Seal Imperial Fishing one. Oh, work for the Imperial Court. Oh, delivering freshly caught fish to the Imperial Court. How do we do that? People list the ones that are on sale in the patch notes. So there's a method to the madness of buying them. I don't understand how you do that. That sounds cool. I'm just like looking at all this shit while I'm in the middle of... Oh no, I'm safe, I'm safe. I thought I was in that bridge still for a sec. Alright, I'm okay. It's all good, alright. Hey man! You look very fucking focused. Are you here to fight the Helms? You're just in time. You've come seeking a legendary blacksmith? Well, you've come to the right place. I am Baratan Lancer. Okay. Collecting pieces to restore the slate. You say you're here on a request from Aingid to restore the butt slate. He could have just come here himself to tell me that. Haha. You might find the pieces of the slate look like ordinary rocks, but in fact, the pieces are composed of ancient metals you won't find anywhere else. Ah, so people list ones that are on sale? Okay. I think they're really expensive, like more money than I have right now. Otherwise, I definitely want them. One day, I will get all the outfits. The Helms can't tell the difference though. They simply pile up pieces of the slate onto their wagons. Promise me one thing. I hope you aren't too harsh on the Helms. The Helms aren't as bad as you think. I could even see us coaxing... Oh, coexisting, not coaxing. Coexisting with them in the future. So if you're looking for those slates, try searching their wagons, not them. Destroy their wagons and get me at least 100 pieces of slate. And again, try not to harm the Helms. I don't want to hurt our relations with them. Well, too bad. They're gonna come for me. Did you change Japan trip photo? Oh fuck! I haven't looked at it, Dipsy. No. You know what? I really should. Let me... That's funny. Let me find a photo right now. I haven't. That's funny. What if it's another Taiwan picture? That'd be embarrassing. I liked the picture because it looked very festive.